Question 17 from passage 4 asks us, which of the following graphs best represents the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium contents for two types of compost, coffee grounds and alfalfa? Although the chart's a little hard to read based on the key, I'm going to call the first column the coffee grounds and the second column the alfalfa compost. Well, what we need to do is go back to the passage and find the area where they give us the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium contents for both coffee grounds and for alfalfa. When we do that, we notice that the coffee grounds has a lower nitrogen and lower potassium content than the alfalfa does. So when we go back to the graphs, I'm looking for the coffee grounds to be lower in both nitrogen and potassium. When we do that, we see that the only choice that works is choice A. Question 18 asks about study 2. They ask us, what pots should have been included in the study if we wanted to answer the question whether or not adding compost to the soil increases the percent of seeds that produce mature bean plants. To answer this question, we need to go back to study 2, and what we notice is that all of the pots used contained some amount of compost. Therefore, when we look at the percent of seeds that produce mature bean plants, all of them had some type of compost mixture already in there. So if we wanted to see if just adding soil made a difference, we would need to test some pots with soil only. That would act as a control group, choice G. Question 19 says that it was hypothesized that when compost with the highest percent nitrogen was added to soil, it would produce mature bean plants from at least 75% of the bean seeds. They ask if this hypothesis is supported by the results of study 1 and 2. Well, what we do is we go back to study number 1, and we notice that they were looking for the highest nitrogen. They were looking for the highest nitrogen content. When we go back to table 1, we notice that alfalfa with 3.5, that had the highest nitrogen content. So then we use this in the hypothesis. They say when that highest nitrogen content is added to soil, it will give us at least 75%. And we notice that the last three, specifically the 20% and 50% alfalfa, those were the trials that used alfalfa. And when we just had the high nitrogen content in the soil, neither of those reached the 75% of seeds that made mature bean plants. Therefore, we have to say that no, alfalfa had the highest percent nitrogen, but did not satisfy the hypothesis, choice C. Question 20 says, based on the description of study 1, as organic matter decomposes, which of the following changes take place? As I scan the answers real quickly, I notice that they are either talking about the phosphorus content changing or the temperature changing. When I go back to the passage, I notice that we have different values for phosphorus because of the compost. However, we don't know what those original values were, so I don't know if they went up or down. However, within the passage, they do say that the decomposition process was considered complete when the temperature had risen to 40 degrees centigrade. Therefore, I know that it is a temperature change that's happening with compost. Specifically, it rises, so it's increasing, choice J. 21 asks us which of the following was the primary purpose for stirring the materials in study 1. Well, they talk about either raising or lowering the pH or decreasing or increasing the amount of oxygen in the materials. Well, in study 1, we notice that pH is different for these, but we don't know what the original values were, so we don't know if it increased or decreased as it composted. However, we do notice that in the reading they tell us compost consists largely of organic matter that has been decomposed by bacteria that require oxygen. Therefore, the only choice that makes sense with these answers is that stirring would increase the amount of oxygen in the materials because they were trying to let decomposition happen. Choice D. Question 22 states that it's known that bean plants must have some potassium from the surrounding material in order to grow to maturity. And then they say, based on the results of study 1 and 2, the mature bean plants in the mixtures containing pine needles most likely obtain the required potassium from. So we go back and we notice, first, pine needles gave us no potassium at all. And then when we go to study 2, we notice that the samples that did use pine needles in them did have some plants that produced that went to maturity. However, that was going to be because of a mixture of soil within there. There is no potassium from the pine needles. Therefore, for choice 22, we have to say that it was the soil only that gave the bean plants the required potassium, choice G.